Hello, the New York State TESOL Secondary SIG Group presented this webinar on high prep discussion protocols for ELLs. Unfortunately, due to some technological difficulties, the beginning portion of our webinar was not recorded, so I am recording this brief introduction to orient you before we get into the meat of the presentation. Our secondary SIG group consists of myself, Stephanie Chu, Dr. Sandra Vargas, and Timothy Nassau. Last year, we presented this webinar called Beyond Turn and Talk, Low Prep Discussion Strategies for the English as a New Language Classroom. We talked about 3 strategies: speed dating discussions, numbered heads together, and up, down, both Y effective evaluation. If you are interested in learning about these strategies, you can watch the webinar on the New York State TESOL channel on YouTube. To clarify, when I'm talking about low prep discussion strategies, this refers to strategies where the students do not need to prepare any ideas in advance. So for all the strategies that we talked about in last year's seminar, in last year's webinar, the students can participate in the discussion without needing to prepare ideas before the discussion. Meanwhile, in today's webinar, we will be talking about high prep discussion strategies. So for these protocols, the students need to come to the discussion having already completed the reading and prepared ideas in advance. You may provide class time for preparation or ask students to prepare for homework. In our webinar, we will talk about 2 high prep protocols: literature circles and Socratic seminars. Dr. Sandra Vargas will first introduce some research about literature circles, and then I will go over how to set up and implement literature circles in your class. Then Dr. Vargas will talk about the research surrounding Socratic seminar, and then again I will explain to you how to structure and implement Socratic seminars for your class. And now on to the webinar as it was presented. I did not see Sandra's message. This webinar is being recorded. Okay, so let me just get my windows organized again. But as I was saying, we're talking about high prep discussions protocols. So these are protocols that students will need to prepare for in advance. So we would love to know what has been your own experiences with implementing student-led discussions in your classroom, what's been successful and what struggles do you encounter. So feel free to just write that in the chat box, or if it's easier, you can unmute yourself and just share out. Okay, so thank you, Christine. The students need to have a very clear structure to follow. I definitely agree with that. And you're going to see the way I implement structure in the 2 protocols today. Yes, Shauna, sometimes they do get off track. And that's why having a clear structure is so important. And I think that's also where our role as a teacher kind of more like a facilitator for these discussions is really important. Yes, we need to provide them with language sense to help them with participating in discussion. The students not knowing how to start, we've all experienced that moment of silence or maybe a couple moments of silence. Yes, we have the hesitant students combined with not knowing how to start. Okay. So having prompts for them to lead to so they know exactly what they should be discussing. That's great. They need to be motivated. The topic needs to be of high interest. Oh, that's interesting. I like that idea, Christine. Chat chips, making sure everyone can speak. Well, thank you for your ideas, for sharing things that's been working, and as well as what concerns you've had, what struggles you've had. Um, so the first protocol that I'm going to talk about today are literature circles. And this is a book club meeting where students have assigned roles, but they collaboratively discuss a text that all students have read. Sandra, you want to talk a little more about the research? You have to unmute yourself, Sandra.
Sorry, I have a million screens open. Okay, so we're going to discuss a bit the research behind it, but before we dive deep into the research, I want to talk a little bit about speaking performance level descriptors, and I'll go through them. Just hold on one moment. Okay, so with the continuum of language acquisition, we have speaking performance level descriptions, right? That they consist of different targets of measures and general claims in terms of what students are able to speak off of. So the language stated in those targets of measures indicates specific language, right? That correlates with the discussion protocols that will be discussed in the webinar. And the speaking performance descriptors are used by teachers to support students with those necessary scaffolds in order to meet the linguistic demands of each proficiency level, right? Going from entering to emerging, transitioning, expanding, and commanding. So for example, there's a general claim across all the level descriptions that students can participate in discussions about academic topics. So for example, if we look at the transitioning side of it on that continuum, right, that midpoint, there may be a student at this level, right? And they may be able to use those simple and or expanded sentences in a discussion, while an expanding student may be able to use complex sentences. So therefore, we know that at this level, we need to provide those students with those necessary scaffolds and vocabulary to develop the skills that they need to reach the next proficiency level. And that's why these performance level descriptions are so important, because it tells us educators, right, where we need to scaffold and intervene so that our students can be successful, whether it's in the literature circles or Socratic seminars. So we go to the next slide, Stephanie. If we look, the general claim is the same, right? Students can participate in discussions about academic topics. However, that target of measure is different, right? So there's a different target of measures, and then this would be what we use depending on which type of discussion we're having. So in this particular one, it talks about students being able to use appropriate language to describe or convey relevant details and narrate a story or process in sequence. So we know that we'd use these targets of measures and these proficiency levels along that continuum to see what we can do to scaffold and to support our students to be successful in our conversations. In the next one, we'll notice again, it's the same general claim, but this one here, this target of measure 3, goes a little bit higher, right? And that depth of knowledge here, the students are able to analyze a topic and interpret the facts and evaluate the evidence. So we know, if we see this goes up a little higher within those critical thinking skills. And this is a particular important one, in my opinion, for those Socratic seminars where they're really having to dive deep into those conversations. So this is just a tool that we wanted to put out there. We can certainly share it, but it does exist, and it's an excellent scaffold to help our students. So now going into the research part of it. So we wanted to back up, right, what we are saying in this webinar with the relevant research, right, and what other studies have said, confirmed or disconfirmed. So in doing a little bit of research in terms of literature circles, we noticed that there was a bit of a gap in literature studies for high school students. We were able to find for elementary students, but there was not a lot in terms of high school students. So I wanted to share this particular research that was done by Carson and Slavitz in 2015. And this was an exploratory research around the use of literature circles. However, this particular research focused on elementary students, but we can see how it correlates in some way or another with the high school students because the format of the seminar, the literature circles is the same. So in this study, the researchers used 24 students. Out of 24 ELLs, only 5 out of the 24 were ELLs across various proficiency levels. So again, we noticed that there's a lack of research, particularly with ELLs and this type of discussion protocols. So what they used were pre and post survey collections to assess students' attitudes towards reading. They used their qualitative reading inventory to assess their students' comprehension levels. And they also use observations taken during their small group and whole class discussions and samples of student work. The intervention method that they used to carry on the literature circles was done over the course of 2 months. So teachers that participated in this study integrated 2 rounds of literature circles, and each round was approximately 2 to 4 weeks. The findings, so from this study, there were general findings in terms of students' oral communication, their attitudes before the study, and their attitudes towards reading after the study. The most notable findings within the oral communication were among students who were generally quiet before the literature circle was introduced, right? So students that were generally quiet and participated approximately 3 times a week were now participating on a daily basis. So we can see, right, it works for our younger students. It could work for our older students. In terms of their attitudes before the implementation of the literature circle, they found that 9 students perceived themselves as needing help with reading, and 10 students felt that they were mostly okay with the reading. However, after the literature circle was done with the students, 17 students out of the 24 felt that they read as well or even better than what they did before. So by looking at their attitudes, right, we can see that this gave them more confidence, right? It was another way to get students talking and participating. And we do also know that it was done over a short period of time. So maybe, within time, they can get more and more students to change their attitude towards reading. Again, here, going with the attitudes of toward reading. I think, Stephanie, it's the slide before the one with Victor's story.
Kendra?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, this is the slide with Victor's story.
Okay, sorry. All right, so in this one here, we have a story about a little boy. And I'd like you to take about 2 minutes to read it to yourself, and then we're going to kind of make an inference as to why the student became more engaged.
Sandra, did you want the orange box there or no?
No, we can take it off.
Okay, hold on.
Yes, now we have it. Thank you, Christine. Yes. So after we're done with reading Victor's story, if we can please type in the chat any inferences as to why the student became more engaged. Thank you, Grace. Yes, it meant something to him. Student choice. Student connection to curriculum, absolutely. Victor had a choice and materials that interested him. So this is why I love research so much. So after reading or while reading this particular study, yes, he was interested, he had a choice. But not only that, this particular student decided that he wanted to read more about this topic and even interviewed his grandfather who had fought in a war. So this topic was culturally relevant to him. So it opens up so many doors in terms of what we can provide our students, and again giving them that autonomy and that choice of what they want to read, and they are so much more interested when they have that choice and when the text is relevant to them. So it gave the student an opportunity to talk about a personal experience, about something so close to him as to his grandfather. So it was a great it was great to see what a literature circle or what a Socratic seminar can do for our kids when given that opportunity to discuss. You know, they come out of their shell. So I love this part of it. And going back to the findings. So these were all findings about their attitudes after the literature circle had been employed, right? So now in terms of the reading comprehension, we see that the pre and the post students had, actually for the post, right, they showed a significant increase in this short amount of time, where students that were at a level 4 jumped from a 25% accuracy to a, why do I hear myself twice, to a 52%. So there was a significant increase there. Also, students that were currently on level 5 did show an increase. It wasn't as significant, but they did move up to 29% of comprehension at both levels. So that was good. And also from their lowest readers, students who were obviously a grade level below, there was one student that was at the pre-primer level and one at level 1. And these two students were able to increase their reading abilities by at least 1 grade level up. So we saw a lot of improvement and significant increases among that comprehension. So this is what we have for the research in terms of the literature circle. So now Stephanie's going to go in depth on the setup and everything that it entails.
Thank you, Sandra. So when you're trying to set up a literature circle with your own students in your classrooms, What's important to keep in mind is the students need a lot of practice with this, practice with the protocol, practice with discussion. So you'll want to have regular meetings. I would suggest regular meetings every 1 to 2 weeks. This allows for the students to get practice. It allows for you as a teacher to provide instruction in between the meetings that can then be applied to the next meeting. And it's close enough that each meeting is close enough to each other that the students can recall the last meeting and apply feedback from and learn from their mistakes from the previous meeting to the next one. So for each meeting, you can have the students discussing a different story, or if you're reading a longer text, a longer book, different chapters for each meeting. Each group should have about 6 to 7 students in the circle, with each student preparing for a specific role. This allows for the students to learn from each other, see how others, quote unquote, perform the role, and practice different skills that are necessary for both literary analysis as well as discussion. And then, of course, you rotate the roles each week or with each meeting. As a teacher, you should provide the students with a meeting procedure to follow with recommended times. So, for example, I would give them a meeting procedure that tells them exactly what to talk about in which order, a reminder of what they should be doing, and approximately how much time to spend. You should also provide them with sentence starters that are specific to each role in the literature circle, as well as sentence starters that are more general and can just be applied to any kind of discussion. You should also provide the students with a job preparation worksheet, and this worksheet should be completed before the discussion in advance. Each worksheet should be specific to each role. And of course, you can provide directions for how to complete the worksheet and reminders of what their role or responsibility will be during the discussion. And finally, I like to give the students a group folder to keep the materials, because when I have my students do literature circles, I'm really pushing them to gain a lot of autonomy, a lot of independence. And so they are responsible for organizing everything and holding on to everything. So these are the different roles for the literature circle. We have a discussion director, a summarizer, a passage picker, illustrator, a word wizard, and a connector. As you can imagine, the role of the discussion director is to lead the discussion. They keep the group on task and, sorry, I'm getting over a cold. I'm a little sick, so bear with me. The discussion director keeps the group on task and maintains order and makes sure that everyone is participating, inviting group members to respond and keep the discussion going. The discussion director should keep track of time. So that's why it's important to provide students with the recommended times. And then students who are exceeding that amount of time, they probably need to speed up the discussion, while the students who are moving too quickly through each part probably are not having a deep enough discussion. The discussion director should also prepare at least 4 strong discussion questions. And of course, depending on your circumstance, the number can be modified. But during the discussion, they ask the discussion questions and provide opportunities for their group members to discuss, obviously. And I always ask the discussion director to begin the meeting with a reminder of what they read and review the feedback from the previous meeting, what they did well, and the areas needing improvement. So the next job is a summarizer. their job is to summarize the text using their own words. So this directly connects with the second the second target of measurement, right? Being able to describe and convey relevant details and narrate the story or process in sequence. So the summarizer presents that summary early in the discussion. This helps review the plot for the group, gets everyone on the same page, provides a reminder for all the students in the group of what they read. And then, of course, the other students can ask questions, ask the summarizer to repeat or clarify any details. At the end of the summary, the summarizer makes a prediction about what will happen next in the story, if it's a book, or if it's a short story, they can provide their opinion on the author's choice of title and justify it. The job of the passage picker is to closely read and select meaningful, well-written, or important passages from the reading. Possibly passages that contain a literary device that you've been focusing on in your regular lessons. And the passage can be anywhere from a few sentences long or a few paragraphs. You should have the passage picker record the page or paragraph number, present it to the group, either read it out loud, or if it's longer, ask your group members to reread it quietly. But what's really important is that the passage picker justifies their choice. They need to go beyond summarizing the passage, and they need to provide analysis. And during the literature circle discussion, the passage picker should not just be sharing out the passage and their own written analyses. Instead, with each passage, all the other group members should be responding. They should express their agreement with the analysis and add on additional details, or share a different perspective, a different way of interpreting that passage, or check their understanding. But definitely going beyond just sharing out. The next job is the illustrator, and the role of the illustrator is to draw a picture of an important event from the text or some visual representation of a particular literary device in the text. It can be a sketch, a colorful drawing, cartoon, visual timeline, anything, as long as it's visual and creative. So this helps tap into another modality to help reinforce the students' understanding. And also for some of our students who are more artistic and more creative, this is their chance to shine. Group members, when the illustrator shows their illustration, the group members can guess what it's representing and try to connect the drawing to their own ideas about the text. They can do this before the illustrator explains what the picture means or what it represents. The next job is a word wizard. So what I have the word wizard do is to analyze diction in the text. But perhaps your students have not been taught to analyze diction yet. So in that case, this role might change a bit and be more focused on vocabulary. But what I have the word wizard do is to analyze diction, like connotations and things like that. So they're focusing on only single words or very short phrases. They're choosing several words or phrases that reveal important details or information about the characters, conflict, theme, imagery, tone. So they choose the word, they record it with the page or paragraph number, they copy down the sentence that has that word or phrase with a dictionary definition or explaining the definition in their own words. And then the most important part to get them to like really secondary level, and as a high school teacher, preparation for ELA Regents, being able to analyze that diction. What are the connotations? Based on the connotations, what is that word or that phrase revealing? I'm really pushing the student to see or appreciate the power of the author's word choice, the power of a single word or the power of a single phrase. And just like with the passage picker, during the discussion, it shouldn't just be the word wizard sharing out their words and analyses. The group members should be responding, expressing their agreement, adding on additional details, sharing different perspectives, checking understanding. And this is why it's so important to have those sentence starters available for the students so that the students have the language that's needed to engage in that discussion. And it's really important to have the discussion director really clearly knowing that if the students are silent for the when the word wizard or passage picker are sharing out, well, the discussion director needs to help invite the students to respond. And finally, the last rule is the connector. The connector chooses 3 passages, lists the page number and paragraph number, possibly passages that contain some literary device that is the focus of an instruction. And they're making a text to self, text to world, and text to text connection. And same thing, the connector shouldn't just be sharing out, but the sharing out of the connection should then lead to a discussion of that connection with all members of the group. And I really like this because this is an opportunity for the students to be making personal connections, and you get to learn more about the students, or the students realize they have some similarity with each other, or getting them or seeing them find a connection between what you're reading and something else they're learning or something else they read. This is a really great opportunity for them for you to push the students to be making these kinds of connections and seeing similarities. So when the discussion is finished, you want to have the students do a reflection in which they evaluate how they did, how just individually, as well as how their whole group did, their preparation and discussion, and give them a space to explain how the discussion strengthened their analysis of the story. This might be a strong point that was discussed, a new perspective they had not considered before, some new insight, or something else, something that allows the students to reflect on what they talked about and then consolidate it in their reflection. So personally, I think that these kinds of literature circle discussions are best for longer blocks or double periods. But you might want to adjust to fit this to fit your class times. And of course, adjust the quantity of work to fit the students' levels. The roles and prompts can be modified for nonfiction. There is flexibility with that. And as well as flexibility with, there's flexibility with how you modify the roles and prompts, as long as the different roles and the different prompts are targeting different reading strategies and skills. When I first started doing literature circles, I had the students do it after reading a text, and I saw it as an opportunity for students to collaboratively work through their understanding of that story. But most of the time, I have the students complete a literature circle after reading a text and after providing instruction on a particular literary device. I think this device then becomes the focus of the discussion and the focus of all the prompts on their preparation worksheets. So I would say it does take a good amount of prep work and training, and after the first few discussions, the students get the hang of it, and it can be quite self-sustaining, and with practice and feedback to the students, they can run it very independently. It is possible. For for the first literature circle the students do, I always have the strongest students in the group take on the roles of discussion director and passage picker, since these tend to be a little more difficult. So now, I've been talking a lot, explaining how I've run literature circles in my class. I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you find exciting about implementing literature circle discussions, or questions or concerns that you have that maybe we can try to talk about? How might you implement literature circles in your class? Or if you already have, what additional suggestions or insights can you share with our fellow webinar attendees?
I'll start.
Yeah, that'd be
I'm
great.
Christine. I absolutely love how you've aligned the TOMs and language progression. This is wonderful. I am thinking about, I teach adults in a community college. I also teach elementary school. In the elementary school, we use guided reading. So within our guided reading is basically a literature circle. And I'm seeing this methodology, how it could also improve listening skills. So as you're taking anecdotal notes of our students, we're also noticing if they're listening to each other and having that effective communication. So that's their speaking and listening. And then it's also proving that they comprehended the story. So that's their comprehension, their reading. And then later on, you write about it. So I can draw some parallels in all different ages of methodology.
Yeah, absolutely. In order to be able to respond in a way that is logical, you have to be listening carefully to what the student who's speaking is saying. And I often ask the students to even paraphrase the speaker first before they respond.
Ooh, I like that a lot. Yeah, nice.
I like how it gives all the participants an opportunity. So you may have your receptive students that are just listening or are better at reading, while you have your productive students who are talking up a storm. So it gives students at all different levels that opportunity to engage in it in one way or another.
And I would also say, this kind of goes hand in hand with building a good classroom community. When the discussion director is inviting students to join the discussion, I always push them to invite the students who are generally on the quiet side as well. That's why it's really important to foster that warm and safe environment, so that they see that as not being singled out, but as actually being invited to be a part of the discussion.
And there's a message in the chat, Christine Passarelli, thank you. She says, I love how the students have choice, and they can also use the STEMs for conversation on topics that they want to debate about in your opinion units as well. Awesome.
And just to let you know, at the end of the webinar, obviously because we had a few tech issues, I'll be frank, we're going to be a bit over time. So I understand if some of you have something else you need to do after and need to leave early. But at the end of the webinar, I will be sharing folders with all the materials that I've created for literature circles and Socratic seminars.
That's very generous. Thank you.
Absolutely. I want to help other teachers save them time. Okay.
Yep, I don't see anything else in the chat. I think we can go on.
So the second protocol that I want to talk about is Socratic seminar. I'm sure everyone's heard of Socratic seminar or have been pushed to use Socratic seminar at one point, but this should be a student-led text-based discussion in which the students are sharing their interpretations and challenging each other using inquiry to deepen their understanding and dissect complex ideas. So we can, again, there's a very direct connection with the targets of measurement that Sandra introduced earlier, with questioning and paraphrasing, analyzing a topic, interpreting facts and evidence, connecting evidence to a claim, presenting opinions. These two protocols are directly providing practice with meeting these targets of measurement. Sandra, you want to do a quick overview of the research?
Yeah, so like with everything, right, we want to make sure that what we're utilizing with our students is effective and also research-based. So within another search about Socratic seminars and how these benefit our ELLs, I came across a study from Jensen. This was a fairly recent one done in 2015. And this particular study explored one specific teaching assessment strategy, right, which is the Socratic method, for which they used it to develop the critical thinking skills and its effectiveness on our English language learners. So the critical skills referenced in this study were broken down into 6 specific characteristics or skills. So they broke them down into interpretation, analysis, which we saw in one of the targets of measures, evaluation, inference, explanation, and self-regulation. And what they mean by self-regulation is that self-evaluation piece of it, right? Are students able to self-evaluate themselves and know when they perhaps answered incorrectly or didn't understand, and they're able to go back and make adjustments to their process. So even though there were 6 main specific skills, they were all rooted in understanding how the students looked at a question and reasoned with it, as well as the idea of how they perceived an answer to a problem or a question. So this was all the focus of this study. So this one was done with very early 7th graders in an urban school. They had approximately 188 students. 15% of the student population were identified as English language learners across all grade levels. So it didn't matter whether they were entering or expanding, they were all included. And 13 of that 15% population were in dual language programs. So that's the composition of the students that they used for their study. What they did in terms of the data that they collected to see pre and post was they used the baseline data after the very first Socratic seminar, and they utilized a holistic rubric that they created to assess the students. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so the intervention method that was used was across 5 weeks. The teachers used the content that they taught every day, so it's not new content, except that they were adding that Socratic questioning at least 3 times a week. They were first trained in recognizing those critical thinking skills, the 6 that I mentioned previously. They were also trained in using the Socratic method and questioning. And they were also trained in using the holistic rubric to assess their students as they were doing the Socratic seminars. Before they rolled it out in its entirety, the teachers did one practice round with the students, but at that point, they didn't take any data. They were coached through the course of 4 weeks. It was once a week, 1 hour a day for 4 weeks. After their training, after the first week of training, the teachers began. And at the end of the first week, the Socratic seminar was conducted, and then that's where they assessed the critical thinking skills. Just after the first week, it was kind of like a baseline data for them. Then they began their implementation phase only. So these are short studies, but they did it for the course of 4 weeks, where they added that questioning technique to their everyday lessons. And then at the end of the 5th week, they used the Socratic seminar to assess the development of those critical thinking skills. And what's interesting is that they did it in both English and Spanish. So it was interesting to see that both groups were included in their new language as well as their home language. And then obviously the teachers recorded the students' progress by utilizing that holistic rubric. So in terms of, we can go to the next slide, Stephanie. In terms of the findings, so if we look at the left-hand side, we'll see the week, right? They only used 13 students, and their first week was the baseline. But if we see, there was a progression in terms of how the students were increasing their proficiency in terms of those comprehension skills and critical thinking skills. We do notice that like the second week was at 29%. The third week was actually higher than the fourth for some reason. But at the end of the fifth week, there was only 11 students, and we do see that it had a 0.7 increase in terms of those comprehension skills versus that second week. So that was a significant change in that comparison of the baseline and the post-test. So we can say, right, the research says that this method works and there is improvement. Of course, you know, it's always a great thing to continue and do long-term studies to see the real effectiveness, but in just a short period of time with a very short sample of students, we can see that there is improvement within student achievement. And so again, you know, doing and trying out these methods over a long period of time would likely produce, right, greater growth in those critical thinking skills. And the results also indicated that the language challenges of our ELLs didn't hinder that development, especially because it was also done in their home language. So the findings are very important and significant in terms of the research and their language acquisition. So it is recommended that Socratic seminars should be used, right, to improve that language proficiency in our students. And that
Okay.
can now
Thank you, Sandra, for sharing all of that research. So with Socratic seminars, I'm sure you guys have all experienced that moment where you try to do a Socratic seminar and the students are just looking at each other, or maybe you get beyond what feels like eternal silence, but the students are only sharing out their own ideas. In my opinion, in my opinion, in my opinion. So the way I try to combat this is by introducing various discussion strategies one by one. I don't expect my students to use all the discussion strategies from the first Socratic seminar. Instead, I introduce them one by one. I provide instruction with each discussion strategy and practice, including using accountable talk in regular lessons before expecting the students to use them in a Socratic seminar. So the different discussion strategies I'll cover across maybe a year with my students is expressing an opinion or relevant comment, quoting or supporting evidence from the text, and analyzing evidence from that text. And the first three are kind of all together at the same time, particularly with the expanding and commanding students. I will, the first Socratic seminar, I'll expect that all my students, and when I'm assessing them, I'll assess them on their ability to do at least those first three strategies. And then every time we have a Socratic seminar, I'll add on another strategy, like inviting someone to join the discussion, affirming and adding on to what someone else said, asking a question for clarification, asking a question about reasons, evidence, and causes, paraphrasing what someone else said, disagreeing or presenting a different perspective, and discussing implications and consequences. So I will provide the students with a list of sentence starters that can align with the different discussion strategies. And again, I'll share this with you, and you guys can feel free to pick and choose the ones that you like, and depending on your students, present a much more succinct, much more consolidated list for them. But I actually like to attach this list to their desks so that they can refer to it during regular discussions like turn-in talks, or small like 5-10 minute discussions in regular lessons, not just the Socratic seminars. So for preparing for the Socratic seminar, you want to make sure that you give sufficient time for students to read the text and provide them with guiding questions for students to respond to. You want to teach the students how to annotate and require the students to either annotate or complete a separate graphic organizer for their notes. During the actual Socratic seminar, they sit in a circle, and of course, since we are teachers, we often have large class sizes, so just split them into 2 groups, an inside and outside circle. And I would say allow at least 20 minutes for one discussion. You want to provide a mid-discussion break for peer feedback. And I like to provide a 1-minute speaking limit because there will always be a couple of students who can speak for forever. They'll just go on and on and on. So the 1-minute speaking limit helps make sure that everyone gets an opportunity to speak. I also give my students a little pressure by saying that they cannot have more than 20 seconds of silence. So this pushes the students to say something. And with my ELLs, I kind of feel like for Socratic seminar, they have ideas, but they're just kind of too hesitant to share it out, and they hesitate too much. So by telling them you can't have more than 20 seconds of silence, it kind of pushes them to jump in a little faster, even if they have not constructed the perfect sentence yet, which is what a lot of them want to do, but push them to just like focus more on expressing themselves as opposed to making everything perfect. I also like to provide an opening question to begin the discussion and orient the students. And during the actual discussion, I try to physically remove myself from the inside circle so that the students look at each other and not at me. A lot of times, if I'm like physically right next to them, they'll say something and look at me, try to get some kind of verbal or nonverbal confirmation of what I think about their ideas. But instead, I want the students to be giving feedback to each other, not looking at me for feedback. So this allows the students to lead the discussion. And typically I intervene if it seems like the students have been repeating the same point over and over again. If they get too far off topic, if they missed a really important point or made a highly illogical comment, or of course, if there's disrespect, though I've never had to deal with that. So those are the moments when I will intervene. But at the same time, it is important to not intervene too early, because you want to give the students an opportunity to learn how to recognize problems in a discussion themselves and bring the discussion back on track by themselves. So I also tell the students that they should think of this as a collaborative discussion in which different perspectives and questions are welcome, but it's not a competitive debate. Sometimes when the students hear that it's good to disagree with each other and question each other and challenge each other, they'll say, oh, just like a debate. And I'll be like, kind of, but in a debate, you're trying to win your argument. In a Socratic seminar, you're not trying to win. The point of questioning or disagreeing is to provide more perspectives that can deepen everyone's understanding. So it's about collaborating and contributing ideas to build everyone's understanding, as opposed to trying to win an argument. So as I mentioned, a lot of times with our large class sizes, we need to split the group and have an inside and outside circle. So I assign students a buddy in the same circle, and they need to invite their buddy to join the discussion. So their buddy's always going to be mixed proficiency. So someone really talkative will have a very quiet buddy, and vice versa. I also assign the students a coach on the outside circle or the other side circle, and the coaches sit behind their partner. And during the discussion, the students on the outside circle take notes on their partner's contributions. And then during the mid-discussion break, they provide feedback to their partner on how to improve their contributions. Maybe making suggestions about what they can say next, or making suggestions about how they can respond to someone else, some idea that has already been presented in the Socratic seminar. And the outside circle also takes notes on the ideas that they agree or disagree with. I like to have my students do that because it ties in with the reflection that I ask the students to do after the Socratic seminar. So after the Socratic seminar, there is a self-evaluation and the students complete a reflection on the discussion. I've had students do a written reflection. I've also had them do a verbal reflection on Flipgrid to really try to hammer in the speaking practice. So you can provide the students with a reflection prompt, or you can have them discuss ideas from the Socratic seminar that they agree or disagree with. Like I was saying just before, that's why they were taking notes on ideas that they agree and disagree with. So for example, I might give a reflection sheet that looks like this, where on the front side, there's a space for their coaching feedback to their partner. And then there's a space, a little simple T-chart to write down ideas they agree or disagree with. And then on the back, there's the reflection that they complete afterwards, where they can self-evaluate themselves. And in terms of everything that you see here, these are basically different discussion strategies. And at the beginning, the list will be very short. And as the year goes on and the students get more and more practice with Socratic seminar, I will add more and more discussion strategies to this list here. And then finally, the prompt for the reflection. As a teacher, the way I'm assessing the students, I take notes on their contributions, the ideas that they presented, and the discussion strategies used. So I'll have an Excel sheet, kind of like a checklist with all the discussion strategies listed, and I'll just put like a tally mark every time a student uses a particular discussion strategy. And then I'll write my little anecdotal notes so that when I give them a grade, I'm able to evaluate the quality of their contributions, their ability to express ideas, their referencing to the text, listening and appropriate responses to other, and their reading and preparation, which is mostly the annotations or graphic organizer for note-taking that they complete prior to the discussion. So again, not literature circle, but for the Socratic seminar, we'd love to know what you are excited about for implementing Socratic seminar. Sorry, just copied and pasted this. What questions do you have about implementing Socratic seminar, or how might you do Socratic seminar in your class, or what? If you have done this before, do you have other suggestions or insights that you can share? I'd love to hear your ideas, your reactions, what you think.
I think that in order to implement these, right, they need to be very structured. It takes a lot of practice. It doesn't happen in 1 or 2 weeks, but with overtime. So having a clear structure and having those clear guidelines certainly make it easier to implement strategies like these.
Absolutely. I actually kind of feel like a lot of times teachers use Socratic seminar as like a culminating activity when they finish reading something or at the end of a unit to but I think it needs to be used more frequently than that. I used to have my students do Socratic seminars every other week. Um, with that being said, I'll to be transparent, I had the students for many periods in the week, so it gave me the opportunity to do that. But even after, the amount of my teaching periods with the students was reduced, I at least did Socratic seminar at least twice in a marking period. So providing that regular practice, consistent practice, I think is important for getting the students to feel comfortable with Socratic seminar and to grow in their comfort with contributing in a discussion that's not so small group. There are a lot more students watching.
Yes. Someone in the chat also mentioned how it lowers that effective filter. So that's definitely very important. Thank you, Carla, for that.
You're welcome.
Christine?
Hi, yes. I also, once you said there was a discussion monitor or someone said discussion director, I said, oh my gosh, sometimes we're in meetings and with adults. And you almost feel like there should be a discussion director of some sort. And many of us have gone through school just as the student that Stephanie talked about, that type of student where they look to you for that appeasement. Am I doing this right? Am I doing so that culture of appeasement? Many adults go through that, as do our students, and that's also cultural, personal, whatnot. So this is such an amazing skill to give that human being, your student, this communication skill to be even more successful in any field in the 21st century.
Absolutely.
This is so important. Let me lower my hand.
Yeah, and I've seen lots of other teachers have a specific discussion leader designated for a Socratic seminar. And if that's a necessary support that your students need, definitely you can assign that role to someone. I always encourage my students to take on those kinds of responsibilities, whether or not that they are designated as a discussion leader.
Love it. Thank you so much. I love this topic. I would like to write up a very succinct or just very effective summary of what I'm hearing here. But I also don't want to give away everything for the people who are not. I mean, I want to give our members some of the information who received the Monday memo who could not be here. But I'm also not looking to give the whole thing away for people who weren't sitting here throughout the nice webinar. So I'd love to talk more about this or have some kind of a continual discussion, even if it's asynchronously with members.
Yes, and we also have it on our blog, so we can also direct them to our blog. We wrote up a nice piece that kind of summarizes everything.
Mm-hmm.
Really great stuff.
Thank you. There is something I want to make clear, and I think Sandra or someone else mentioned this before, but this is not building the students' capacity to effectively engage in extended student-led discussions will not happen overnight. A lot of, as some of you have mentioned yourself, a lot of structure is needed and the time is needed to build up the students' discussion skills. Not only do the students need to practice discussions like literature circles and Socratic seminars, but they need the daily opportunities to practice smaller discussions in everyday lessons through turn and talks or any of the low prep discussion protocols that we presented in last year's webinar. They need to be able to practice discussion strategies in everyday use and often be guided to use them. You know, I have often prompted them to be like, okay, Sandra, what did Christine say? What can you say in response? Or did you understand what Christine said? Okay, then paraphrase what Christine said. You can start paraphrasing by saying, if I understand you correctly, you mean, right? Or Sandra, it seems like you disagree with Christine. What can you say to show that you have a different perspective? Right? Those kind of prompting in everyday lessons and even during these literature circles and Socratic seminars, that prompting may be a necessary scaffold before the students really take it on themselves.
I wanted to add, you got me thinking about another great, what you're talking about, having the students have their accountable talk. Someone had something physical where they had a popsicle stick, and we all know the popsicle stick, you pull the child's name, but she had on one end red, and then after you called that child's name, you turn it upside down, the other side's blue. So they already spoke. Yeah, I think that's wonderful. I you know, just to see, for the kids to see a visual. Yeah, I mean, we have some students who not only do they perfect hiding in the wall like a wallflower, they sit still, and then once you start bringing out the popsicle stick, they know they can't hide. It's kind of interesting. So this is such a powerful conversation, and it does so much for our students.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Any last questions, comments? Do we have webinar dates for July or August? Sandra, Christine, do you know the answer to this question?
We have so many things. We're working on many things, and we're looking to take the first week of July off, and the second week is going to be a slower work week, and then we'll be back mid-July. But we'll get it out there on our social media and our Monday memo and other ways to communicate with everyone on other webinar dates and events. We're really trying to have more in-person events. We're trying, and it's been somewhat successful, but not super successful. So it's just a different world, you know. But thank you so much for your interest. Was that?
Thank you. Yes.
Sophia? Who was that asked that question?
It's Carla.
Carla Miller. Hi.
Okay. Thank you, Carla. And you know what, if you want to email me, if there's any events in person or webinar that you might be interested in a topic, I think sometimes that also gets more events going when we say, oh, there's more interest.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Definitely. Stephanie dropped in the chat the link to the Google Drive folder where all the resources are. And our emails are here. So if you have any questions or anything that you may not think of right this moment, you can always feel free to email any one of us. And we certainly continue the conversation or answer any questions or anything that you'd like more clarification or more advice on.
Thank you to all of you for sticking around to the end and just your patience for switching to Zoom, back to Zoom, and with all the tech issues. I really appreciate it. You know, we put in the effort to make this presentation, so we're very happy to see you guys here.
And just one more thing, to please look at our website to see what's available. There's so many opportunities for you to acknowledge, you know, our lovely presenters right now. And there's other ways to acknowledge your colleagues, to acknowledge students with different types of nominations for student awards, professional awards. We have Member of the Month. So please, by all means, please go to our website. Thank you so much, everyone. This was fabulous.
Thank you.
Thank you. I hope you guys have a great end of the school year.
Thank you, Christine
Thank you.
Passarelli. She said, I love all this.